Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our Saturday morning panel, a discussion on Michigan's Freedom to Work legislation. Our panelists this morning are State Representative Mike Shirkey, Stu Sandler, State Senator Arlen Meekhof, Greg McNeely, Jim Holcomb, State Senator Pat Kolbeck, and Terry Bowman. Our moderator for this morning's panel is Nolan Finley of the Detroit News.
I'm standing. Good morning. And I want to assure you, despite what this looks like, this is not the Mackinac Men's Chorus. I saw the size of this panel. It reminded me years ago, I was up here and the chamber asked me to do moderate a panel of 4 business people and 4 politicians. And my charge going in was make sure everybody gets time to talk. Well, one of the panel members was Senator Debbie Stabenow. She got the mic early on and wouldn't let it go. And it went on and on and on. And I finally had to interrupt her. And she saw me later. She jumped me later and said, Nolan, you interrupted me. I'm a U.S. Senator. And I said, well, explains the filibuster. So we're here to talk about right to work, and I recall, I guess, a year and a half, 2 years ago, Ron Weiser stopped by my office with a big, thick 3-ring binder, black 3-ring binder full of studies and polls and charts, and he said, we're going to do right to work. And I thought, well, Ron's crazy. And I guess that's where I want to start. With our panel here. This is Michigan, 5th most unionized state in the nation, home of the United Auto Workers, huge union presence here. What were you all thinking, and what made you think you could get this done? And I guess, Senator Meekhof, let's start with you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the panel and everybody that's here today. And what were we thinking? We were thinking about our kids and our grandkids. The opportunity for them to have worker freedom. I mean, if you think about it, the worker now has the freedom to choose as much as the union has the ability or freedom to make their case. And our kids and our grandkids are going to reap the benefit from it. You know, we've all enjoyed a great Michigan, all of us here on this panel, all of you here. What we really want is the opportunity for our kids and our grandkids. And that's why I think that this is the most important policy decision and implication that we've done in some period of time, and you can measure it against anything, but just the economic opportunity for our kids and our grandkids. Many of you in this audience, including myself, have children or grandchildren that live in another state. We don't appreciate having to go travel to visit them. We want them to be here, and we want that economic opportunity to be here, because when we're all done, sitting in our rocking chair, and all of my kids and my grandkids, all of your kids and your grandkids live here in Michigan because it's their best opportunity, we'll really accomplish something.
Representative Shirkey, where did this big idea start? I mean, what was the genesis?
Nolan, I would characterize it as not listening to the voices who would say why we can't do it, and being continually searching for the reasons in which we could, identifying obstacles. And the biggest obstacle, of course, was the notion that Michigan can never do that. And I'm a big believer in you always find what you're looking for, and so laying it out there, and Arlen said it well, you know, labor freedom, where unions are as free to make their case as workers are to make their choice, and putting it and framing it as a freedom issue allowed people to start seeing that, gee whiz, this is the right thing to do. This is something that's achievable. Nobody in this panel, frankly, nobody in the state could have predicted when, but I think we all were committed to moving the ball down the field and being prepared when the opportunity presented itself.
Senator Kolbeck, we'll get to the sort of the genesis of this in terms of the mechanics, the process of getting this started and convincing other folks, other lawmakers that it could be done.
Yeah, it was a fun journey, and actually, to tell you the truth, I think one of the most remarkable things about right to work or freedom to work in the state of Michigan, it was not that we passed it, but it was how we passed it. I think that's kind of the untold story. it was a very positive campaign. I know we had a lot of visitors on the Capitol lawn there towards the end, but leading up to that, everything that we were doing was focused on, we called it the Philippians 4.8 strategy, focus on what's noble, true, excellent, and praiseworthy.
Amen.
We brought together a broad coalition of people from a lot of different backgrounds. We had folks like Dick DeVos and Ron Weiser, and folks like Jennifer Helmer that just cranked on in trying to get people connected. We had Freedom to Work at the grassroots. We had Mackinac Center. We had Americans for Prosperity. We had our Republican committees throughout the state and Tea Parties. It was a very, very broad coalition that got knit together. And we got knit together in that fundamental promise of working together in partnership. And it gave our country, especially conservatives across the country, a badly needed shot in the arm at a time when we had just taken it on the chin in the presidential election. I've talked to Governors Nikki Haley and also Governor Bobby Jindal. Do you realize what a shot in the arm that gave them after the election? And the key takeaway for me is that whenever we can take on these challenges of potentially contentious piece of legislation, landmark legislation, but if we do so in a manner that truly is a partnership or a teamwork-based approach where we actually go off and emphasize what is really good and what binds us together, it's a powerful formula. If the key to taking on these big challenges is truly to focus on what's noble, true, excellent, and praiseworthy.
Terry.
And you know, Nolan, one of the interesting things is we were at a time as well where union members were willing to speak out and say, you know what, I'm tired of my union dues used for a political agenda that I disagree with. And you know, we know polls after polls show 40% or more of union members do not vote the way their union officials tell them. And they were willing finally to speak out when there's an opportunity to say, I want my freedom. I want my ability to choose for myself whether or not I want to join a union. And I think that was a powerful message as well.
Now, Craig, you did a lot of the organizing, the fundraising, but you guys kept this fairly quiet until you were ready to pop it in the legislature. Building support for this, convincing people it could be done in Michigan. What was the message?
Well, remember the conversation started from the other side. Mm-hmm. We all remember Proposal 2, and literally a year ago this week, the yes vote on Proposal 2 was at 63%. They ended at 42%. We had a statewide conversation about the role of unions in Michigan, and they lost. So they made the case. You know, the entire family was involved in making this happen, and credit goes to a lot of places. But in my mind, there were really two people that made Freedom to Work happen in Michigan. Two guys. And a lot of you probably think I'm going to mention two guys who are sitting in the front row here. No, it was Steve Cook and Bob King.
Amen. Yep.
They brought the debate. We ended it.
Jim, was the business community excited about this, or were they skeptical?
I think they were skeptical, especially originally. Everyone believed the idea was the right policy, was the right thing to do. But as you look out and how many times we had talked about it in the past, it just seemed like such an uphill climb. I think they were a little frightened by the daunting task in front of them. But once again, you know, we talked about Mr. DeVos and Ambassador Weiser coming in, making the pitch, really going around the state and helping to mobilize the business community. They became very engaged and very positive about what could happen.
Jim, how can you say you think they were skeptical? I remember when you and Rich were meeting with Colbeck and I in his office, and you thought we were crazy. I'm not so sure you could say you think you were skeptical. I think you were skeptical.
Well, and I guess that would lead me to ask, was the GOP delegation, were the Republicans in the legislature, were they fully on board?
Actually, it was one of the, early on in our caucus, when we first formed, Senator Meekhoff can back me up on this, this is one of the top issues. But there was this practicality where everybody said, well, yeah, and we know that's what we need to do, but then they said, but we can never go off and do it. And the optimistic projections was that this was a 20-year plan. And we get into the mode, and Arlen can back me up on this, is that why not now, why not now, why not now? It got to the point where it's kind of like the kid on the way to Disney World saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And it takes that persistence, as our governor talks about. It's relentless positive action, and I think that's what really carried the day.
So you all agree that Prop 2 was the was the trigger here, that was what opened the opportunity. Had that not been on the ballot, would freedom to work have passed?
I think, Nolan, we probably could have passed it, but I think that the task was a little different. How you messaged, how you did things differently. The contrast was what was important. I think what showed up in Proposal 2 was we're going to try to codify or put in the Constitution bargaining rights, and folks said, you know, that's not right. It should be more on the free side. So the contrast, I think, was what was important. Not necessarily that it was Proposal 2, but it made our issue and made our message a little bit different because the contrast was so great.
Now, Stu, you work with a lot of the lawmakers, a lot of folks in and around Lansing. Was there fear here? Was there a sense among some of the folks you work with that they might be kicking a hornet's nest?
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, it started with Prop 2, but it also, if you look to Indiana and Wisconsin, that's also really opened these issues up, and it really opened conservatives up to the idea that these issues are winning issues and the public will support them. But the legislators, everybody had some trepidation about moving forward. Conservatives have been talking about right-to-work principles for years, and you know, I applaud Terry for going into his union shop every day and really take it. You know, some of us go to our offices where we talk to all people who agree with us, but Terry goes in and talks to the other side every single day. But yeah, I think there was, yeah, he deserves it.
Thank you.
I will say there was trepidation, but I think everyone acted really courageously, and I think particularly the elected officials, and we need to support them in 2014. Yep.
So,
Nolan,
Terry?
something interesting, I think a lot of people were looking at Indiana in November 2012, how that would play out. And they actually gained more seats in the legislature after they passed right to work. So that is very promising, I think, as an issue that freedom to work is an issue that we need to embrace because it's something the public wants and the public agrees with. So I think that's a very positive sign.
And I was supposed to tell you in the beginning, you all should have these little cards if you'll fill them out and get them to folks over here. We've already got some, but we're going to try to get to some questions from the audience here in a little bit. But you know, as we're talking about this timetable and this process, you had admittedly a reluctant governor in this. I mean, would that be fair to say that Rick Snyder wasn't sure he wanted to go here? He had said many times leading up to December that this wasn't on his agenda. In fact, it's what he said almost to the very end. How did you get it on his agenda?
Very interesting, Nolan. If I'm ever privileged enough to write a book, that last 2 weeks leading up to the final vote for right to work are the stuff of inside baseball, which we all like, folks in this room like. This governor is very pragmatic, almost apolitical. But on this issue, it wasn't a political issue for him, it was a freedom issue. And when the light bulb went on his face in the room, and I have to say, not to throw my majority leader under the bus, the same with the majority leader. Neither one of them wanted to go there because they thought it was such a divisive issue. But the opportunity to strike was right. And the governor came out to be a leader, like he's from Michigan, he's a leader, right? And he was challenged by that, by a number of folks in the room, and he said, you're right, I need to step up and not just say, well, it's not on my agenda, but if it gets to the table, I might sign it or whatever. He went out and led with us, and I applaud him for doing that because he actually saw the opportunity for Michigan. When
you say led, when you say the governor led Representative Shurkin, what did that look like at the end?
Well, I always read the governor's comments about not being on my agenda, and there was two words missing in that, right now. It's not my agenda, right now. But it was perfectly clear to me that he knew that it was the right thing to do, and he was waiting for the right time. And anybody, I think, in Michigan who would deny that it was a circumstance where all the right things had to come together, including our friends in the union, you know, kind of poking the fire a little bit. But in my mind, the governor was always with us. It was just a question of timing, and he needed to see the win plan. And so this panel and a bunch of folks across the state that have a lot of reach and a lot of influence created a win plan that he could see how we could get across the goal line, and that's what caused him to go from not on my agenda, not now, until, it just moved to the agenda.
I tell you, there's one part, I don't know if you remember that one night where we thought the governor had come out, spoken publicly in support of right to work, and I almost hit my head on the I-beam in the basement jumping up, but
Is that the night I heard Angie screaming in the background?
Yeah, I think it was. So we knew how powerful the governor coming out in favor of that would be for us, and we knew that once we got that commitment, that this was a done deal.
Okay, so you passed it, and everybody, you know, on the other side, outraged, obviously, threatening punishment. There's going to be a price to pay here. This next year will be the first election since Freedom to Work passed in Michigan. Stu, do you expect it's going to cost some Republicans their seats?
You know, I don't think so. You know, the irony is that the Democrats seem to be running away from this issue. You heard all this talk the second it passed that there was going to be efforts to repeal it, and you really haven't seen it. Now, some of it's a question of resources. Some of it's, I think, a question of they challenge they look at what their strategy was last cycle and realize that they didn't do all the right things. And I think some of it's that there's real public support out there, and that's why I think they're not challenging it. So I think our elected officials who voted for it, I think they're going to be fine.
Yeah, and actually one of the secret, people don't talk about this that much, but when I was knocking on doors back during the election, I would not go up to a house with an IBW sticker or UAW sticker on the back of their car, and you go, okay, what are we going to get here? And I got up there, and the first question was about right to work. And Terry can attest to this. I mean, when I knocked on that, and I said, well, I'm in support of right to work, and I got these guys they were all supportive of that position, and I even had folks asking me for yard signs. So I think we're underestimating the support in the rank and file community for right to work.
Absolutely. You know, what I saw is people wanting their freedom. Once we got the message out that freedom to work has nothing to do with collective bargaining, it only has to do with the workers' ability to choose for themselves. Once that message got out and people heard it, they said, well, that's not so bad. And the fact that what Freedom to Work does is it holds union officials accountable and answerable to their union membership, where in a forced unionism state, that's not necessarily the case. So it was great messaging. The governor, when he came out on December 6th, sat down, his messaging was perfect, absolutely perfect on what this issue means to union workers.
Greg and Jim, do you see places in Michigan where you're going to have to give candidates who supported right to work more help this time than you might have?
I would say, I mean, across every election, there's always going to be an issue out there that kind of defines or drives certain districts. And I think certainly in some districts, they'll be targeted, and we'll step up, and we're going to, you know, make sure we fly the air cover and make sure we have boots on the ground to support the people who took the tough vote and made sure that right to work happened. So I think absolutely we'll have to step up, and it'll be a few limited cases where there's probably a severe challenge, but it's something we're prepared for.
Michigan is always a competitive state electorally. The Senate and the House majorities are important to protect for this issue, as well as the governor. With victories in 2014, freedom to work becomes the new norm. It will fade as an issue of political importance, and it'll be like taxes. We'll have to be vigilant, and we'll have to always be on guard to protect the gains that we've made. But this is the election that seals the deal. So it's not over yet, and everything that you all do and that the party is focused on is crucial to maintaining.
So do you expect unions to pour a lot of money in here to punish the governor, to punish some of the others?
They've already identified Michigan and Illinois, I believe, as key states where they're going to pump in a lot of money to win state races. And they're looking at it and targeting based upon this issue. I don't think they're actually going to message on the issue. To Stu's point, they are running away. They realize that we have the upper hand messaging-wise because this is a social justice issue. This was the workplace social justice issue of a generation, and we're on the right side of history. So they will attack our candidates for a variety of reasons. It will not be freedom to work.
I actually think there's an opportunity to, you know, some of the legislators have already talked about it. It's a good story to tell, and we need to be out there selling it for candidates. People need to run on this. Right. That they went to Lansing, they took the tough vote, they made a real change and really impacted our future, and they need to be positive about it. I don't think we should run from it. I think we ought to embrace it and tell the story.
And here's the big opportunity. It's nationally, because if we demonstrate that we defend the high ground, just like Governor Scott Walker did back in Wisconsin, We can defend that high ground. You give courage pills to every state legislator and every state legislature across the country where this does become the new norm.
Yeah, I think that adds to what Senator Kobach said. I had the privilege of speaking at another conference, and I had somebody who was a state legislator from Alaska came and grabbed me by the lapel, looked me right in the eye, and said, I came all the way from Alaska just to hear about how you did right to work.
Yeah.
That's how important this is. It emboldens other people to say, it takes a lot of courage, but it's the right thing to do. And I think it gives everybody the opportunity then to move this wave of freedom, and that's really what it is. We're talking about freedom.
Representative Shirkey, we talked about candidates not running away from this, and this was a very big thing. You all passed this with the idea that it would be very, very good for Michigan. And yet it seems as if the state has run away from it a little, or at least ignored it. We had a Pure Michigan ad pulled early on that mentioned right to work under protests from the other side. Has the state done enough to tout this accomplishment?
I think it's okay for us to talk about the accomplishments regarding labor freedom in Michigan. I don't think it's okay for us to thump our chest. I think the data will speak for itself. Last week I was at a business in Port Huron. They made a specific point that they had a decision to make where they're going to invest $100 million. They had 3 other locations, and they said if Michigan had not passed labor freedom, they would not have expanded in Michigan. Those are the examples that we need to be advocating for. We don't need to be thumping our chest and pounding sand, places where we don't need to be. The data will speak for itself. We have more private sector job growth in Michigan than any other state. The income improvements in income, the rate of personal income growth is exceeding the nation. There's data everywhere, but it's always about what you always find what you're looking for. And I think we have an incredible story to tell. I'm not at all bashful or afraid of promoting it as part of Pure Michigan because I believe taking leadership like passing labor freedom is Pure Michigan.
Jim, we got a number of questions from the audience about impact, measurables here. They want to know if this has helped draw new jobs, new businesses to Michigan. Is it too early to get a measure of that? Are you seeing some new interest in Michigan from outside businesses? And when will we be able to stand up and say, and quantify it, and say we've got this business specifically because we have press, freedom to work, we have these jobs specifically because of that?
Well, I think we already see it quantifiably. When you look at Site Selection Magazine, Michigan is now number 4, and the governor talks about that. People are now looking at Michigan where before we weren't even on the list. It's not that they didn't come here, it's that they never even looked at us. And that's just, that's one of the best things that came out from this now is now we're in the game. Now we can tell the story, now we can make the case, and we're going to attract a lot of businesses. I think one of the hard parts with measurables, though, is all the success that's hard to measure. I get calls, and we have members each and every week that tell us, I'm staying here because of freedom to work. Now, that's not going to show up anywhere as a new job created or new investment, but what it is, it stopped the bleeding. People are not leaving now. They're staying here. They're going to invest. They want to grow in Michigan, and I think that's going to be something we have to look at. We have economists looking at it now. How do we tell that story? Because it's a little more difficult.
Stu, how important is it for us to make those stories known, to bring out these folks who say, I'm here because of freedom to work, and let them tell their stories?
Well, I think it's going to be very important. I think as both Representative Shirkey and Jim have said, this has dynamically changed how people perceive Michigan, but politically, we've got to tell those stories so that they see the actual benefit of what happened.
I don't think, just pick up on that too. As we travel around and I go to, conferences around the country and work with our friends at the U.S. Chamber, it's amazing that in previous years, you really would be somewhere and people would come up and ask, hey, are you guys going to be okay? Is Michigan going to be fine? Are you guys? It was almost like they were just expecting the whole state just to shut down. And now you go and we're almost rock stars where people are looking at what we're doing on the policy front, and Freedom Work kind of leads that charge, and it really is kind of garnering the attention of people across this country to say, Michigan is the place that we really need to look at, whether they're going to locate here or just try to emulate our policies.
You know, I find that myself when I go to other states and talk about this issue. It used to be they would say, oh, you're from Michigan, you know, and they'd get kind of a frown on their face. Now it's like, oh, you're from Michigan. Come here, I want to hear what's going on. So we now have something in Michigan that other states are hungry for. And this is something that really can be a domino effect for the nation as well. So for freedom, and that's a great story to be told.
And one of my favorite lines was out at an AFP conference a couple weeks back, and the delegation from Missouri said, "We want our tent moment."
Well, Greg, I know some commercials are running touting the benefits of right to work. Do you have any sense for whether or not this has gained popular support, whether this has become a law that people embrace and that people say, you know, we're glad it happened?
It's an interesting question. It hasn't been poll tested in the last 6 months, to my knowledge, but right before it passed, it was at 53% support. Since then, I think we retested it in April, and it remained the same. So it's been virtually unchanged. What's interesting about that is between December and up until the Freedom Fund was running the ads that are currently up, the unions have spent millions in their member communication demonizing this, and apparently have not moved the needle. So it's pretty heartening to see that. I mean, this is something that Michigan voters support. This is a winning issue that adds to our coalition, and it is something that we will prevail on.
Okay, so Stu, people aren't seeing the visible impact yet in terms of union members being able to exercise their freedom to work. Do you see a campaign in the future where these people are sort of get to tell their stories and explain why they left their unions?
Oh, I think so. And I think the Mackinac Center is doing an excellent job of telling some of those stories. And I do think you're going to see some of those stories being told. But, you know, to add to Greg's point, we might not have the polling, but if the Democrats thought this was an effective issue, you would see them using this a lot more. And they're not. They're running away from it because it's not an effective issue, and they're not going to challenge it, at least at this point, because they know it's not an effective issue. So I do think these stories will be told, and I think it'll be effective for right-to-work conservatives.
I mean, we thought when it passed that there would be a ballot issue immediately. Signatures would start circulating, petitions would start circulating to get a ballot issue in the November election. Are you surprised that's not happening?
Well, just think about the messaging, Nolan.
Think about what they have to message.
Think of the message would be, let's see, would you sign this petition so we could remove some freedom from you? I mean, you know.
And remember, the unions for the first time in Michigan now have to live in a world where their budget may have a constraint. They don't have a guaranteed income, and so they have to make smarter, strategic decisions. Yeah. I do believe that they'll try to take this back to the ballot in some format, probably not a constitutional amendment, and they'll...
This fall?
Potentially. And I think they'll add a sweetener like minimum wage or do something like that. Remember, when the unions put RIMGen on the ballot, that thing went from 0 to 60 in a few weeks. No one in Lansing heard about it until they filed those petitions. They have the ability and the infrastructure to get to the ballot pretty quickly and quietly. And I think they're just trying to figure out what it is that they want to play. But they almost have to, for their members, to demonstrate that they're fighting this. I mean, they have to try something. If they don't, I mean, it's such a huge admission of defeat.
It's a little bit like playing with fire, though, because about 40% of these members are opposed to some of their political practices. And so you got to, part of the issue with freedom to work originally was that, and in the marketing of this, is that they've got a group that are sick and tired of the way they're spending their money right now. And so this is a case where, you know, they're walking a tightrope. Because if they go off and invest all this money that they've got captive right now in another campaign to try to take away their rights, as Mike was saying, they can lose even more people than they were standing to lose already from the union ranks.
Well, one thing that Freedom to Work does is that it actually brings in free market principles in that relationship between the union member and their union officials. And all of a sudden the union official realizes, or they should realize, that there may be consequences to some of the things that they're engaging in and some of the money that they're spending. So, and big consequences. Right. So all of a sudden, all of a sudden, there's competition for that worker's loyalty. There's competition for that worker to whether or not they want to pay their dues. So I think what may happen is union officials are going to, out of necessity, have to focus on their membership and provide a better service than what they provide today. In fact, we see that in the right-to-work states. Union members are much more happy with the service that they receive from their union than in forced unionism states.
The smart unions will do that.
Yes. Right. Yes.
For instance,
Right. Yes.
an example of one that's not is the MEA,
Yes,
who has gone on a jihad against their own members, trying to keep them held hostage.
Yes.
So, those are the type of folks, the bad decision makers, that I think will continue to try to fight this, and it'll be a losing battle for them.
And I think the unions have to be very careful with the next political move they made, and that's something they haven't demonstrated in the past. I think you can argue who was the dumber union, strategically. You say the MEA, I think there's a real argument.
Right.
But if you think about it, they put collective bargaining on a presidential ballot in Michigan and lost by 16 points. Yeah. And then they lost the legislative battle on right to work. There aren't that many lives left for them to make those kind of political moves.
Greg, the pundits are, when this happened, warned that this might cost, particularly Governor Snyder, but Republicans in general, the middle, the independents, the moderates. That a fair assessment?
It's a fair assessment that that's what the pundits were saying.
You know those pundits.
Yes. And the conventional wisdom is, often wrong. It was misplaced because they misunderstood the governor's commitment to this as a social justice issue. I mean, the legislation was titled the Workplace Fairness and Equality Act. I mean, he understands that this is an issue that is important to families. It's important to who we are, and it's about rights. It wasn't simply a jobs number. It wasn't simply a matter of economics. It was a social justice issue. That is a winning issue with the middle, and Republicans will always dominate when we stay in that field.
Right.
Now, Terry, at least half of these questions from the audience want to know what union members are likely to do once their contracts expire and they have an opportunity to exercise this right.
Well, I think it's interesting. A lot of the UAW officials are saying they don't think it's going to affect them very much. However, I hear a very different story on the floor. And I think what's going to happen is when we see union contracts coming up for renewal, all of a sudden the union officials will turn into their Aunt Sarah, their Uncle Dave. They're going to become apple pie and make the case to the union members, you need to support us because we're the greatest thing since sliced bread. Where before they could easily force it, now they have to sell their services. So are we going to see a big drop-off of union membership? I think in the public sector we'll see more than in the private sector, but I do think they're going to have a drop-off. Can I put a percentage on it? Not at this time, but I think we'll see a significant, much more than the union officials believe.
And one point, if there are people that that are in a union that need help getting out, the Mackinac Center has a great website that provides assistance in doing that.
Yes.
So feel free to engage with them and pass that along, because people do have this freedom, they do have that right, and we should encourage people to exercise that.
Yep.
I think there's examples out there already too. We just saw in Wisconsin last week, the third largest union, 40% of their people left. 40%.
But that's another reason why we need to keep up the pressure in the marketing area. And when we talk about Pure Michigan, when we talk about this, because for too long they've been fed from Solidarity Magazine, The Voice Magazine, all these lies about what they can or can't do as a union member. We need to make sure that they understand that these freedoms are out there. And it's the old case, if a tree falls in the forest, it doesn't make a sound. We have to be very loud about it. We've had committee hearings talking about this where the Democrats are trying to shut up our discussions on this basic issue, and we need to tell people about it.
And that is why groups like the Mackinac Center does such a great job. Scott Hagestrom and Americans for Prosperity, the way that they can educate the grassroots and all the people out there on this issue, it's education and being able to walk to your neighbor or your family member and say, hey, did you know this about freedom to work? It's so important, and that's why, we passed something in Michigan that people thought was impossible. And the way we did it is we all came together. Everyone in the state came together. And we actually did what many thought was impossible. So,
well, you mentioned that you saw a union in Wisconsin lose 40% of its members. Do we expect that same sort of thing in Michigan? Do we?
I think Terry's on it. The public sector unions where there hasn't been the opportunity where the union has made the case for why the employee should join and has not received either benefits or some meritorious type of thing to help them with their job. And in other skilled trades, maybe not so much. I mean, folks there pay union dues and they expect to get training. We have some of the best trained workers in the United States and a lot of skilled trades. So when the person sees a value for the money that they're going to pay in union dues and they want to belong to a union to get those trade skills, I think they're going to stay. And that's fine because that's their choice at that point.
Now, we know, you mentioned that the impact would be greater on private sector than public sector. And we know a lot of public sector union members or public sector workers were deprived of their freedom to work rights by contracts, 10-year contracts that were rushed into place before the deadline. Is there anything that can be done for those folks who are looking at 8, 10 years out before they can go in and say, I don't want to belong to this union anymore?
They would have to decertify their union.
Is that the only hope for those
It's
folks?
just about the only way they could do it.
Representative Shirky, did you, if you all had to rewrite this again, what would you have done to prevent that sort of chicanery at the end of the spring?
You know, I think this legislature, our governor represents freedom in its ultimate element. And so I don't think we should have necessarily restricted more freedoms by trying to be tricky in the language. Yeah. Now, if people choose to play games with the opportunities that are there, they'll receive the fruits of those efforts down the road. But I think it's a dangerous road to walk down to try to bracket everything, because when you do that, you actually are limiting freedoms, the kinds of things that you're actually trying to promote.
Senator Kobach, you all exempted police firefighters from this. What was the thinking behind that?
Primarily it was around the fact that we already had a contentious issue around collective bargaining agreements with police and fire around PA 312. So Public Act 312 was for binding arbitration. There was a pathway for that, and it was working well. We didn't want to disrupt that apple cart right now.
Does it limit the amount of potential savings for taxpayers?
Yeah, definitely does limit the potential for savings.
And Representative Shirky, is there a taxpayer benefit to this, a savings?
Absolutely, because taxpayers are job seekers and job workers in Michigan, and the better opportunities we can create for more jobs and better jobs and advancement and so forth, that benefits all taxpayers, and it spreads the tax burden. And so this is already demonstrating fruits of that along that path line, Nolan, because you know, our revenues are sneaking up. And it's all because we are adding private sector jobs, good paying jobs. Michigan has the more developed and natural resources for high-tech manufacturing than virtually any state in the nation. And what we did with labor freedom was remove one of the last remaining obstacles to really leveraging all those assets. And if that isn't an advantage to taxpayers, I don't know what is.
Mm-hmm. Nolan, there is one other class of workers and citizens that we have not given freedom to, and that's lawyers. Lawyers are required to be a member of the State Bar Association by law in order to practice their trade. So, you know, there are other reforms that are on the frontier of freedom that we need, you know, our legislators to fight for and push, and that's one of them.
Right. Yeah, I think right to work for attorneys' time has come to Michigan.
When this thing was being debated, and there were, you know, the opposition was trying to generate support, a lot of doom and gloom scenarios, lower wages, horrible working conditions, a tilt in the balance between employer and employee. How do you answer those predictions, and do you really expect, have you seen anywhere in the country where that's come to fruition?
I think one of the doom and gloom scenarios before it was enacted is what prompted us to act, and it was the fact that we were the only state in the nation that was actually losing population. And since then, we're actually growing again in the state of Michigan. Matter of fact, our state coffers, the revenue is actually increasing without, not due to tax increases or anything like that, but actually because more people are available for generating revenue in the state. So I think, you know, there's generally a feeling of optimism about the direction that we're headed in, and I don't think any of those doom and gloom scenarios are going to be coming to fruition.
In the last 10 years, the average income growth for freedom to work states was 24%. Michigan, during our last decade, averaged 5% loss in income every year. So the real danger, the real fear was not changing.
Yeah.
Now, Terry, one of the sort of predictions that were made was that this would divide the workplace, that union members and non-union members would be in constant conflict, the whole free rider complaint that was raised. What's your take on?
Well, first of all, they're not free riders, they're forced riders.
Amen.
Because even,
That's right.
even in a freedom to work state, when the union negotiates an exclusive representation clause in there, even people, workers in the bargaining unit who exercise their rights are still forced to accept the limitations of the collective bargaining agreement. So they're not free riders, they're forced riders in reality. But will there be division? It's only if the union officials push it. We have heard of some union officials claiming that they'll post names on a board of people who pull out of the union, which is nothing but harassment. Are we going to see that? I think in the end, no, we won't. And if there is, we'll be there to make sure it stops. And I'm sure that we'll keep a close eye on that. Will there be division between the workers? No, I don't believe so. Because I think that people are going to respect that everybody has a right to choose for themselves. Because forced solidarity is no solidarity at all. So solidarity only comes when people choose to join. So I think that's what we'll see.
What have we seen in other states in terms of union fall off? What did we see in Indiana?
Well, we know in right-to-work states, 75 to 80% of the employees still decide to join the union. So I think that the more investment, the more jobs we bring into Michigan, we could actually see union membership grow in the private sector.
Now, you all were talking before this session about the inquiries you've had from other places. Do we expect this to start a broader movement amongst industrial states?
I can attest to it already. I've been out to Illinois. We've talked to Missouri. New Hampshire's had discussions on it. It's going across the country right now.
We've even had inquiries from Canada on this topic.
Senator, when you're out in your district talking to your voters, getting ready for your campaign, does this issue come up?
Ironically, no, and I'm from the most Republican Senate district, so it doesn't come up very often, which I have the privilege to represent. What comes up more is I want the ability for my family to be here in Michigan. I want them to be here. I spoke on that a little earlier. That's a real concern we have, because over that lost decade that we have had, our kids and friends have moved away, people from our church, leaders in our community, because opportunity was somewhere else. They want that opportunity. That's what really comes up. I want my kids to go to school here. I want them to play soccer here. I think that's the overriding issue of all of this. I want my kids here. I want my family here.
Yeah. You know, speaking of that, the Mackinac Center has a saying that says, making Michigan home again. And I think that is exactly what Freedom to Work is all about, is stopping that bleeding of population loss and bringing people back and saying, you know, come back to Michigan.
Yeah, and early on in our debate, everybody was talking about how divisive this issue was, and we've kind of talked about it already in different terms, but how divisive is it when your family gets split up because your kids can't find a job here in the States and they have to go to another state? They go off and raise their family over there, grandparents are separated. It's just not a good long-term path for something that's being responsible stewards of all of our rights here in the state of Michigan. We got to start taking a look at the full balance of, is a little bit of divisiveness here worth a lot less divisiveness over here?
Nolan, you asked the question, is it being brought up in the district? Interestingly, there's a pretty broad radio ad process going on right now across Michigan, and I've had people say to me, you know, I heard this ad on the radio about freedom in the workplace, and is that what you guys were talking about last December? I says, yeah, and the response was, well, that makes sense to me, you know? And so it's a very effective series of ads that I think are going to help make our case that this isn't about removing opportunities, it isn't about limiting freedom, it isn't about creating angst in the workplace. It is about advancing the cause of freedom for people to have the choice and how they handle their very personal decisions in some place like work.
I want to wrap up. We've got a couple of minutes left, but I want to wrap up by asking each of you the same question. We went through the lost decade here where people were talking about the broken culture in Michigan, and I want your thoughts on, I mean, this is more than just you passed a piece of legislation. This is a fundamental change in the state, and I want to ask you each to voice your thoughts on the long-term significance of this bill and its impact on the culture. And start with Terry.
Well, I think we've talked about some of it. Stopping the population loss, as Senator Meekhoff said, having families grow up together and come back to Michigan, that's going to have a huge impact of bringing some of those jobs back and families back together. And as well as, I think in the workplace, these unions are going to have to focus and rebrand themselves as service organizations as opposed to organizations that immediately start an adversarial relationship with their employers. So that alone will make a better workplace. It will make a better place for people to come to Michigan and get a job and raise their family.
Senator?
Yeah, 2 points. First of all, I can't tell you how many people have said when I've gone across the country talking about right to work, have said, now, you know, we've got this little motto up there that says, if Michigan can pass right to work, what can't we do? So there's a little bit of this can-do attitude, frankly, and this forward lean that wasn't there before. And the second thing, I want to harken back to something we talked about at the beginning. It says that we can take on these controversial issues, if you will. We can take on the big challenges that are out there. But when we do so, if we want to keep everybody here united, we have to do so in the spirit of teamwork, in the spirit of focusing on what's noble, true, excellent, praiseworthy. If you lift everybody up instead of tear them down, you have a much better chance of success, and good things can happen for everybody where you're feeling good about it afterwards, not licking your wounds.
Jim?
I think the long-term impact's really going to be determined on, do we see this as a beginning or another step in Michigan's positive reinvention, or do too many people see it as an end and quit? I think we have to use it as a momentum builder. As Senator said, you know, there's a lot of controversial, tough, complex issues still facing the state, and, you know, we need to use this as kind of momentum to make sure we continue to tackle those.
I agree with everything that's been said, and I would also note that over time, freedom to work is going to fundamentally change the political culture in Michigan. And what I mean by that, I'll use as an example education. In most states, education is a bipartisan topic. People want to reform it. They want to provide more choices and freedom for parents. And Democrats often lead the way. In strong union states, it becomes a very divisive and partisan issue that only one side of the legislative branch or one party will tackle. Over time, as the MEA learns to focus on helping its members and not get in the way of policy that helps kids, education reform will become a bipartisan issue in Michigan.
Senator?
A couple of things that have been mentioned, the can-do attitude. If you can do this in Michigan, you can do it anywhere. But then what can't we do in Michigan? The positive governor, relentless positive action. And again, talking about, going back to the culture question, family is part of our culture. How do we hold that together? How do we move that forward? How do we, again, have our kids and our grandkids here? Because that generates a lot of positive feelings as well. And it's just the right thing to do because family is the nucleus of what we do.
A lot has been said that I don't want to repeat, but the one thing I will say is we're here at the Republican conference, and there are different groups in the party that worked for this issue and different groups that disagree on other issues, but I would echo Senator Kolbeck's comments. When we work together, we can accomplish great things, and I think this issue is, it shows that.
Last word, Representative.
It's all about culture. And leadership is less about the statements you're willing to make and far more about the questions you're willing to ask. And we've changed the culture from asking questions like why not to simply how. And when we continue that momentum, there are no limits.
Let's thank our panel. Thank you.